Hey, Jeff.
Hey, Brad, how you doing?
Outstanding. How are you?
Good, good. Kind of learning my way around Facebook a little bit. I signed up for some basically service that posts articles and stuff to your Facebook page.
Oh, yeah.
Everything. And it's a free service actually that these guys I'm working with showed me about. And like the free service that they offer is up to 50 items per month. Well, I signed up for it and just didn't give much thought. It posted all 50 yesterday. So there's a couple of additional parameters that you need to set. Like how often to post, how many per day, that kind of thing. So there's a whole lot of really neat content out on my page right now.
Yeah.
But I won't have any new stuff for about a month.
That's hysterical. Yeah, I did notice something on your page today. I'll have to go back and see the other 49 items.
Yeah, there's 50 of them. So have at it. They're all pretty interesting.
Yeah. Oh, man.
Hi guys.
Hey, how are you?
Yeah, good. How you guys doing?
Good.
Excellent.
I think on my last trip out to my folks for a little while at the end of the month. We're actually getting them into their new house, and all the stuff associated with the new house, moving in, inspections and all that. It's one of my first trips out there. I identified this girl that is a realtor out there, and I tell you what, if this girl lived here in Texas, she'd be a gazillionaire. As hard as she works, she's just fantastic.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's setting up all the utilities and all that stuff. I don't think they care if they have electricity or water in the house, but the cable,
Yeah.
the cable TV, that's like the most important thing.
Oh, for sure.
So I finally got that scheduled today. It was, you can only do it so far in advance, so I had to wait, until they actually had the keys or will have the keys. So
right.
Yeah. So that was my last little piece, but
Well,
it's
that's cool.
I think real estate's double hard when it's your relatives.
Oh, yeah.
Because this is a simple transaction. They sold their house for cash. They're buying this new house for cash. I mean, as far as real estate goes, there's not much easier. But,
right.
But yeah, it's just the fact that they haven't moved in 20 years.
Oh, sure. Yep. Yeah. All right, guys. So it's about 2 after. So let's go ahead and get started. So today we are going to attempt to answer the impossible, which is how can we get more offers accepted from buyers, and I've thrown in a couple of tips for if you are the listing agent as well. But before we do that, for those of you that did not know, today is International Bagpipe Day. So if you have a kilt laying around in your closet, today's the day to break it out and enjoy some good Celtic music. So from me to you, enjoy. So again, today I want to talk about things we can do to kind of increase our chances of getting some offers accepted. I'm not going to have all the answers. I mean, you guys are the ones out there doing it. And so if anybody has anything different or better to add, please feel free to chime in. But, on the buyer side, here's some things to consider. I mean, you have offer acceptance based on the actual terms of the contract. So there are some things that we're going to review in that category. Then you have loan types. And so cash conventional are preferred over FHA and VA. So, there's some issues there. And then limited inventory. And there's really no getting around that. From the seller side, they tend to run into, obviously, just too many offers at one time. And regardless of what you have before you, if we're given a choice of more than 4 things, 3 or 4 things, we tend to get overwhelmed by that. And especially the pace and the velocity at which offers come into a seller can be very unnerving. And so they have their own set of issues going on too, which leads me to the second point, which is they just get overwhelmed with who to choose and how to choose them. And they've got to have a really good agent to be able to help them navigate through that. And then, you know, from a seller's perspective, even the best offer can get derailed once the inspection is done. Because as my next point says, the buyer will say or do anything to get the home under contract for all the reasons that we've been talking about for the past 12 to 18 months. And so this kind of desperation on behalf of the buyers is creating a scenario where, you know, some of them are not the most forthright. So before we kind of move on, we have to keep ourselves in check with regards to how much influence we actually have. And so these circles are sized this way intentionally. The smaller circle represents what it actually is that you as the agent can control. The larger out you go is these are things that you can influence. And then lastly, these are the things you just have zero control over. And they far out proportion the other two. And some of that is how much you can control and how much your client can control. And, you know, emotions run high during these situations, especially when they're offering everything but the kitchen sink and they're still not getting offers accepted. So, I mean, just bear in mind that we can control very little, and remind your clients of that same fact. The sellers can choose whatever offer they want. It's our job to kind of try and make the offer as compelling as possible without going crazy. So what are some solutions when it comes to the actual contract? All right, so you can sign an appraisal waiver, and we're at the end, I'm going to go through 5 or 6 of these contracts just as a refresher. So you can sign an appraisal waiver and provide proof of those funds with your offer. So I think that we typically talk about just signing the appraisal waiver, even if it's option 1, which states, doesn't matter what the appraisal comes in at, my price is this and I'll make up the difference. I think the seller would feel more comfortable if they knew that you had the money to do that. Okay, and that can only really apply to a conventional loan anyway. But that being said, that's one step further you can go. Offer above asking price, but within reason. Too much over creates doubt among sellers. So I've had agents that have clients that are offering $50,000, $100,000 above asking price and still not getting the offer. And I think that when you're the seller, if it's too far above, that breeds skepticism. Like, okay, well, what's going to happen? Can they really offer that much? Can they really make this loan happen? What if the appraisal comes in, you know, even $50,000 less than that? They would have to write a check for $150,000. So you can kind of see where that extreme can breed, you know, skepticism amongst a seller. You could offer to pay the title policy, all right, which is based on the pricing is going to be about $2,500 to $4,000 on the buyer's part, but that is cash in pocket to the seller. That's a big deal, and that remains pretty compelling. Pay for your own home warranty. So in the space that it says residential service contract, just leave that blank. I mean, either you as the agent can pay for it, or they can pay for it. I don't have on here, you guys come out of pocket with your commission. I'm not going to recommend that, but it's always an option. If you feel that that's going to be the tipping point, then obviously you have that leverage. Doesn't matter to me. You're free to negotiate your commission however you'd like. You could waive the inspection if the home is not older than 5 years. Risky, but I think that once you get past that 5-year mark, you run the risk of things being defective. But that might sway a seller's decision. Always ask the seller if they need a lease back. So if they need to stay in their home while they transition into wherever they're going next, offer that up front. Don't ask. Don't wait to be countered that. Just ask the selling agent up front, would it be helpful if the seller's got a lease back? And if that's the case, then offer it at no cost. Don't ask for repairs. And you can state that in your email. Unless they're the big four, the roof, foundation, HVAC, and hot water heater. I think those are basics that need to be in working order. But everything else, maybe you consider not asking for repairs. Shorter option period, more option fee, more earnest money. So shorter option period. I would never recommend eliminating the option period. Texas is a great state where they allow, the unrestricted right to get out. I think as a buyer's agent, you're doing your buyer a disservice by suggesting that they do that. However, if maybe you originally wanted a 7-day option period, maybe you whittle that down to 5, based on how quickly you can get an inspector out there. And that is going to be predicated on when that contract is executed. So if it's executed on a Friday, well, you're going to waste 2, probably 3 full days in trying to get someone out there. But if it's executed on a Monday, you have the entire week to get somebody out there, assess repairs, float that to the selling agent, and see what they say. So even if you're doing an inspection and you're never going to ask for repairs because that's what you've told the selling agent, and you just want that peace of mind, assuming you still have your option period, you still want enough time to get that person out there and provide you with that opinion. More option fee. So this is pretty self-explanatory. If you were going to offer $150 or $250, maybe it's $500, $600. That's money right into the seller's pocket, along with earnest money. So the earnest money is obviously deducted from the overall cash to close. However, the higher that number is, the more of an indication that is to the seller that your buyer has a strong vested interest in getting that property. Because if something does go wrong and the buyer defaults and it's a situation where the seller gets to keep their earnest money, that's why you want to offer a little bit more. Okay, so those are pretty much the contractual things you can do. So some other things you can do, if the contract requires a survey, you pay for the survey, that's another thing. Maybe your lender advises you that you don't need a full 28 days to get approved. So maybe you whittle that down to 14 or 21. Those are things that I'm not going to include here because they come with a higher risk. But they are certainly levers that you can pull to make the offer more appealing. So let's talk about some of the things that are non-contract related. So the caveat here is that anything that relates to money or that kind of compensation, buyer needs to ask their lender first, because based on the kind of loan they're getting, they're going to be limited as to how much they can actually do in this area. All right. But a lot of times there is tremendous stress on behalf of a buyer because they have to worry about where they're going to be if there's an overlap between the time that they close and the time they have to move in, or they have to be here for a job on April 1st and they're going to close on April 15th. What do I do? And so don't forget the option of an Airbnb. So there are so many of these things, and so many of these, they call them hosts, only play in this space, meaning that, yeah, you can go to XYZ town and stay for a weekend in an Airbnb, but there's also a subset of hosts that only rent out their homes to people that are staying for at least 30 days. In fact, if you do a search on Airbnb for a weekend, these folks that are doing 30 days or more won't even show up. And similarly, if you do a search for 30 days or more, only that subset typically will show up. So the amount of money they'll have to expend in an Airbnb for 30 or 60 days is really nothing. I mean, think of it as a short-term lease. Even if they have to move twice, you know, if it means they're going to get into their home, you know, eventually and be there for several years, this is a very small near-term price to pay. So don't forget about that option. They're very easy to get. Think about new construction, right? There's no seller to deal with. I know builders have their own issues going on right now, but the one thing that is removed from the typical transaction is the seller themselves. You know, the seller doesn't have to move out. Seller doesn't have to go anywhere. They're not going to ask for a lease back. And new construction, meaning spec home or from the ground up. You may have to look elsewhere. I've had agents come to me and say, well, I have these clients. I must have showed them 25 homes over 2 weekends, and it's because they want homes in a very highly sought after area. And I'm thinking of one in particular where the agent, to his credit, convinced them to look in a completely opposite direction. Schools were still good, neighborhoods were still good, but it just wasn't as heavily sought after as where they were looking, and they found a home. So you may have to have a heart-to-heart with your buyers and understand what their true needs are, because they might be looking for a year if they want to get into a specific place because of certain criteria versus, you know, bending on where they need to be. All right. Pay for sellers move or anything else that causes them inconvenience. So if you have had listings, you will likely have gotten a question from a buyer's agent that says, well, before I send over an offer, what are your sellers looking for? In other words, what would make my offer stand out? And part of what they're asking are these types of things. And it's going to take some probing on y'all's part to figure out what these things are, but everyone's got something. And if the people are willing to move your offer to the top of the pile, if it means you're taking some kind of inconvenience off their plate. So I just, as a placeholder, said pay for their move. You don't have to do that, but it's just an example of something that is generally viewed as a big pain that you might be able to alleviate. Maybe you pay for the housekeeper to come in and make the home spick and span before they move in. That's originally a seller's responsibility. Maybe you do that. Whatever it is, you want to make that process as smooth and convenient as possible for the seller. Mentioned this before, so have your buyer's lender call the listing agent to vouch for their credit worthiness, or just a general conversation to just reinforce to the selling agent that the buyer is well qualified. There should be no issues, just as a second support. All right, so I mentioned a month or so ago that, you know, it's a big no-no if your buyer wants you to put in offers on multiple homes. All right, still stand by that notion. That can end very badly. However, if you are looking at several homes and the buyer decides to put in an offer on one, but there was a real close second and third, I would suggest that you write offers on those and have them prepared in zip forms, signed by your buyer, all ready to go out if something should happen to the home that you're currently writing an offer on. All right, so think of an empty gun. These are your bullets. Do you want one bullet in the chamber, or do you want 3, 4, or 5? All right, so again, I don't want you guys writing offers and submitting them for multiple homes, but have others available, ready to go, because you're going to waste time, weeding through the buyer's emotions of not getting the home that they wanted. Then you got to go back and find the time to write the contract, and that consumes time that you don't need to worry about, versus just queuing up the other offer, sending it over to that new selling agent. Okay, so it just decreases your time. So consider expired listings as a possible option for your buyer. So I know there's not a whole lot of expired listings out there. However, there are some. And so typically we run a list of actives to go see. You might consider in your search clicking the box that meets all of your buyer's criteria that says expired, because that might be your only solution. And I don't think a lot of agents do this, and they figured if the home's expired, the home's expired. The person doesn't want to sell it anymore. Well, yeah, they do. That was the reason why they had it on the market to begin with. So if that comes to be and you need some help, navigating through that process, let me know. But there's an agent that was attached to that listing. Your first call should be to them. And if the agent said, well, I'm really not representing that person anymore, go knock on their door, or contact them in some way, because you legitimately have a buyer. All right, and then put a maximum deadline of 3 days for a response from a seller. I think NAR says that they have to respond to you within 2 days, but I know that there's multiple offers going on. But by the same token, your buyer has to move on. And this is more of a mindset than anything else. It's not you being a difficult agent. It's look, we need to know now whether our offer is accepted or not, because we've got to move on. We're wasting time. So don't let the seller string you along. It's important to just kind of figure out where you are in the offer acceptance process and move on. All right, so we usually think about this buyer process and the beat down that it is lately as a negative, but I want you to try and reframe what's actually going on. Even though it's taking longer to find a home and this process can be taxing, it also means you're spending more time with your client, and they are seeing you as a problem solver. And the more time you spend with your client, the more you're building that relationship. Now, this will not end up this way if you allow the buyer to blame you for what's going on. And so why would they ever do that? Because you haven't prepared them for the reality of the home buying process. Okay, if you come off like Superman and you're just going to get them the first home they see, that's painfully unrealistic. And some of your clients think that you're going to do that. And so get ahead of that curve and make sure they don't, make sure they know the reality of what's going to happen and that you're in it together. I've heard a lot of agents tell me that their clients are just exhausted and they said, I'm just going to take a breather for a while. I'm just going to rest. And my response is always, you do that. I'm not. I'm going to continue to look at homes for you. We're in this together, and you expressed interest to buy a home, and I'm going to find you a home. You take a rest for right now, and if something reveals itself that I think would be a good one to look at, I will call you. But that kind of dialogue supports the relationship fostering versus kind of digging your head in the sand, burying your head in the sand, and hope that things just kind of work themselves out. In this market, they're just not working themselves out, right? So you have to create a more collaborative relationship, because normally if the market's balanced, you could be done with your client in 30 days at the most. And that's really not what you want. You want that relationship to sustain so that they can continue to refer people to you. So try and think of this season of real estate as a good thing. You're spending more time with the client. All right, so let's talk about the seller side. So if you represent a seller, I would be wary of offers that are too far above asking price. Buyers will use this tactic to get the home under contract, then based on the inspection, ask for money off the price. Okay, can you see this happening? So home is listed for 400,000. The winning offer is 475. The seller thinks they hit the jackpot. They got a conventional loan, putting 20% down. What could go wrong? Well, then it comes time for the inspection, and things that normally would not be a big deal become a big deal because they're paying $75,000 above a price that was probably inflated anyway, which is a reasonable thing to think, by the way. You pay $75,000 above asking, you want a perfect home. And when you get a 50-page inspection report that suggests it's not, you start wanting rebates. But this is a very, very common tactic for buyers and buyers agents. Okay, so the highest offer is not necessarily the best. If you're a seller, ask for proof of funds to support any appraisal waiver. Okay, this will make your decision a lot easier. Ask for an appraisal waiver. Okay, if it's above asking price, then that's appropriate. You can't make it a condition of the sale, but you can put language in there that says, if you are offering a price above the listing price, please provide an appraisal waiver and proof of funds. Opt for cash or conventional loan type. All right, so it just goes without saying that these two are stronger and preferred. So I'm speaking on behalf of the seller now. They usually, at least a cash offer, will lead to a quicker close. But again, be wary of the process going almost too smoothly. Pay close attention to their down payment. All right, so if they're only putting 3%, 5% down, the more they're getting a loan on, and the more difficult it is perhaps to close. All right, so if you're in a multiple offer situation, this is the seller, don't be afraid to negotiate certain points. So before you accept any offers, unless they've said it's their best and final, people typically try and get away with what they can get away with on the buyer side. So if you're the seller and you have 5 offers and 2 are really strong that you think you might want to entertain, go back to each of those and say, would you be willing to do this? Would you be willing to waive, you know, the option period, whatever it is, and get confirmation, and that can help your decision. All right, and then similarly to my buyer suggestion, make a decision within 48 hours. I mean, buyers just, they have to move on. You know, I know the more offers that you get, the more overwhelming it can become, but you owe it to the buyer to determine, you know, what offer you're taking. All right, and then you as the agent, be wary of agents coming back and saying, what offer did you take? What could I have done better? You know, just be careful of breaking that agency relationship. For all intents and purposes, you really can't tell them. Just say that the sellers took the offer they felt was best for them. Okay, and then lastly, make it easy for both sides to win. And I say this because the sellers are in the driver's seat and they can pretty much do or say anything within reason and get away with it in this market. And so sellers can do that. Should they do that? Probably not. You know, so make it easy. Someone wants to sell their home, someone comes forward, wants to buy it. Let's just make it easy for both sides and move on. Okay. All right. So before we go on to the individual contracts, does anybody have any questions or anything that they're doing differently that is more compelling?
You know, Brad, the one thing I wanted to mention about the moving is a lot of the larger moving companies offer a certain amount of time of free warehouse storage. So if there's a difference between your move out date and your move into your new one, a lot of them offer free warehousing basically for a certain amount of time. So
good to know.
And like I said, that's the bigger ones. That's like the Arpens and the bigger companies, not the mom and pop or the two guys in the truck guys, but the
Right,
bigger ones.
right. Good to know. All right. So the first one is it's usually called the appraisal waiver, but the official name is addendum concerning right to terminate due to lender's appraisal. So just as a refresher, the way this is filled in is it goes in order of most restrictive to least restrictive. The most restrictive is a complete and full waiver. That's option one. What does this mean? And so you're only picking one of three. And so this one means that if the sales price is 400,000 and the buyer offers 450, but it appraises at 4, the buyer will come out of pocket for the full amount of $50,000. That's option one. Okay, option two says, and by the way, what is this waiving? It is waiving the buyer's right to terminate the contract based on the appraisal. So if this is a financed option only, please don't let anyone tell you that if you have an FHA loan or a VA loan, you can still sign this. You cannot. All right, but in the third-party financing addendum, there's buyer approval, which can you get the loan, and then there's property approval, which is the appraiser, the appraisal, insurability, all that good stuff. All right, so option two is a partial waiver. It says buyer waives buyer's right to terminate the contract under paragraph 2B of the third-party financing if property approval is not obtained because the opinion of value in the appraisal does not satisfy lender's underwriting requirements, and, which is what it always says, and that the opinion of value is X amount or more. Okay, so this is the one that I like. So it has to appraise for at least this. And that's typically a pretty good compromise. So the option 3, an additional right to terminate within X days. Now this adds days here. So the buyer can terminate the contract within X amount of days after the effective date if the appraised value according to the appraisal is less than X amount. So in my example, if the $400,000 home that you're paying $450 for, if that appraised for $399, they can actually get out, and they have 3 days to do that. So none of the other options add a component for days to exit the contract. So you can kind of see where this is the weakest of the 3. Okay, but there are only 3 options here. Buyer and seller both have to sign this. All right. Seller leaseback. Okay, so philosophically speaking, I don't like leasebacks. It doesn't mean don't use them. They're almost a necessary evil. But here is my personal opinion as to why I don't like leasebacks. It's because the old owner no longer has title to that house, yet is staying there. And so you got some people that have complete pride of ownership and they're going to treat it just as they did when they lived there. But then you have people that think, I don't live here anymore. I can do whatever I want to this house. Now, I know that there's language in here that says that you can't do that, but people are low class sometimes, you know, and they'll do stuff, they'll break stuff, and theoretically it should delay closing, but usually the buyers just want these people out and they want to get into the home that they want to get into on closing day, and they just want to move on, and it just creates an ugly situation. So that is my opinion on leasebacks. However, if you have to do one, which is very typical, this is kind of what they look like. It's a 2-pager. And absent of writing up an actual lease, this is kind of what you would use. So when I mentioned earlier that you wouldn't charge them, you know, this is where you would put that. So the term terminates on a specific date. Okay, I've seen people put relative dates in here like 2 weeks after closing. Well, what if the closing date was moved? Put an actual date in there. Tenant shall pay landlord as rental X amount per day. And people always ask me, what's a good amount? Well, if you're going to charge them, average rent is what, $2,000? So $2,000 divided by 30 is 66. So anything up to that point, I think, is fair. If you don't want to charge them at all, just put none. But if you choose to not charge them, what I would do is always get a deposit. All right, and I would say that's $1,000, $2,000 based on the price of the home. They can get it back, but you want to be able to parse out some of that money if something did go wrong. Okay, now note on paragraph 9, condition of property, tenant accepts the property in its present condition and state of repair at the commencement of the lease, which is usually the closing date. Upon termination, meaning when they move out, tenant shall surrender the property to landlord in the condition required under the contract, except normal wear and tear and any casualty loss. So if there was a hailstorm, which is our most common example of casualty loss. Now, why I get worried is paragraph 14. When it comes to what if something breaks, except as, and it's underlined, so you know that someone's talked about this quite a bit. Except as otherwise provided in the lease, tenant, so the old owner shall bear all expense of repairing and maintaining the property, including but not limited to the yard, trees, and shrubs, unless otherwise required by Texas Property Code. Tenant shall promptly repair at tenant's expense any damage to the property caused directly or indirectly by any act or omission by the tenant or any person other than the landlord, landlord's agents, or invitees. And so I always worry about the HVAC breaking down. Theoretically, if the new owner has a home warranty, it will cover it, but it won't cover the trip charge. So it's really the tenant's responsibility to cover that trip charge if a home warranty exists. If it does not exist, the tenant bears the responsibility of paying for that. And how do you think the old owner is going to feel about spending $1,500 on an HVAC repair for a home that they no longer own? Not good. So it leads to friction. So that's really why I don't like these things. If you have to do them, I would say a week at the most. I've seen them for a month. I think that's excessive, but that's just my 2 cents. All right, any questions on the leaseback? All right, notice of buyer's termination of contract. So you'll have to unmute yourself to answer this, and the correct answer, as I've always offered in the past, you get a $500 Blockbuster gift card if you get this answer correct. When do you submit the notice of buyer's termination of contract? There's lots of options here. Is the 1 to 4 executed and countersigned and both parties in a binding contract in order to send this? Yes or no? Anybody? Yes, it is. Yes, it is. So the notice of termination of contract normally is given during the option period, but there are, and that's number 1, the unrestricted right of buyer to terminate the contract under paragraph 5 of the contract. But there are others. Buyers can't obtain buyer approval. Property doesn't satisfy property approval, which is the appraisal, or the roof is damaged, can't be insured. Buyer elects to terminate under paragraph A of the addendum of property subject to an HOA. Tons of stuff, right? There are 7 choices, and then 8 is other. Okay, so this would be if you are already under contract. All right, so let's talk about the notice of withdrawal. So this is a notice that to the seller that the buyer is withdrawing their offer for the home. Okay, it's just a one-pager. And in this instance, the contract has not been countersigned. So why would a buyer ever do this? If they had been looking for a long time, they just wanted to get into something, they pulled the trigger on this home, they sent over an offer, you're still waiting to hear from the seller, but in the meantime, you were also on the waiting list from a builder, and the builder called you and said, we actually now have that home available. Do you want to move forward? And the buyer says, absolutely, I do. But what do? I already submitted an offer to this other home. Well, you send this over and withdraw your offer. Okay. The difference is money. The difference is if you do it this way, then you are typically not locked into the option fee and option period because there's nothing that has been executed. Okay. The notice of termination, you're well down that road. Okay. So the other companion document that goes with either of these, so whether it's a notice of withdrawal or a notice of termination, is got to get that earnest money back, right? So if it's a notice of withdrawal, then no earnest money would have typically been given. All right, but the termination does. Now, why is this important? Some people might just think this is a formality. A title company in Texas does not consider a transaction closed unless this has been submitted. Okay, so even if the parting is amicable and the seller agrees to release the earnest money back to the buyer, the title company can't close out the file and do anything with it until this signed document is given to them. Similarly, the seller cannot put their home on the market if this isn't signed either, because that's considered someone else really still claims to have a stake in that property. And so if the earnest money hasn't been returned, then it's still up for interpretation. Okay, so if you have to submit a notice of withdrawal, it's just that one piece of paper. If you're getting out of the contract because of one of those 8 items, then it's the termination of contract and the release of earnest money. Okay, got to be sent at the same time, or should be. Okay, went into that. Okay, so just some miscellaneous things. And I have these random thoughts. Some of this is related to the material today, some of it is not. But when it comes to listings, if you're listing your own home, whether it's your own primary residence or an investment property, if it's your home and you're the agent, please fill out a listing agreement and all of the other paperwork that goes along with the listing as if it was for another client. And I'm going to get into the reason why in a second. Okay. And then secondarily, again, if it's your property, whether you're buying a property or selling your own property, be sure to get an inspection done, and someone has to provide a home warranty for my E&O insurance to cover that transaction. Okay, E&O will cover every transaction where we represent someone else, but when it comes to our own property, it gets gray. All right, so just make sure that those things are done, and certainly make sure you disclose that you're the agent and the owner. Okay, so a word about how to fill out a repair amendment. So think of yourself as the buyer's agent, And if you want certain things addressed from the inspection, and you attempt to write a repair amendment, try and stick to the words either repair or replace. Be as specific as you possibly can in those requests, and use pictures if at all possible. So let's take a roof, for example. If the roof is deficient, you don't typically want to say repair or replace the roof. You either want to say repair it, which is if the roof is defective, there's no repairing it. Or you specifically want to say replace the roof. There is no gray area there. But if you make a statement such as fix the plumbing issues in the bathroom, well, that's too general. That's too vague. You have to be specific. Fix the left side faucet of the master bathroom vanity that is currently leaking. Okay. If you want something replaced, say you want it replaced. And HVAC is a great example. If it's a 10-year-old system and it's just barely blowing out the right temperature of air, and you want it replaced, say replace, don't say repair, because repair is open to interpretation. And what that leads to is your buyer goes to walk through the home 3 days before closing and realizes that their interpretation of what they meant was not the seller's. And so now you have to worry about delaying closing. Were they malicious in making this kind of lackluster repair? It just leads to ugliness. So just make sure you're very, very specific. Okay. So so I have a story of the week for you that kind of supports my point about my first item here. Fill out your paperwork, listing agreement for your own home. So have an agent has been working with a very sweet couple from California. She is, I want to say, between 6 to 8 months pregnant. Job relocation, got to be here in March. Looked at dozens and dozens and dozens of homes to no avail. They finally got under contract and thought that this was the one. Well, come to find out, the home was listed by a realtor. It was his home. New agent, never done a transaction before, and thought it was a good idea to make that first transaction his own home. And it would have been okay if he didn't just go through a divorce and the property was collateral damage. He had a significant IRS lien on the home. And he had to deal with lawyers to go back and forth to determine how to proceed with this transaction, and that just delayed things. And so the closing date got delayed a week because of this. And as those 7 days are counting down, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, closer we got to when it was supposed to close, we find out that even if he sold the home at the current price, which these buyers offered above list pretty significantly, the equity was still not going to be enough to pay off his lien, which meant that he couldn't pay the commission either. And because of his inexperience, he just and this world of just horrific circumstances he was in, like most people, were embarrassed, ashamed, and just kind of hoped it would work out. It did not work out. Yeah. So moral of the story is that, and thank goodness I got involved, and thank goodness the broker on the other side was extremely helpful. But that was the catalyst for me sending out that email last week about how important it is for y'all to call me when you sense something is amiss in a transaction, because he clearly did not do this. And so he, in essence, committed fraud. And I want to show you why that is and why it's important to fill this out. Here's the listing agreement. As agents, we worry about all this. Who pays what, intermediary, lockbox, broker's responsibility, I'll advertise, what kind of loan. And we pretty much check out when it gets to paragraph 12, because that's what the seller has to attest to. Well, let's see what the seller has to attest to. Seller has a fee simple title to and peaceable possession of the property and its improvements and fixtures. Seller is not bound by a listing agreement with another broker. I've had this happen about 3 weeks ago. I won't go too deep in the weeds on that, but this actually happened. Seller decided to enter into 2 separate agreements with 2 separate realtors in the hopes that they would duke it out, and whoever brought the best offer she was going to go with. You can't do that. No person or entity has any right to purchase, lease, or acquire the property by an option, right, or refusal or other agreement. Boy, let's take a look at 12E. Seller is current and not delinquent on all loans and all other financial obligations related to the property, including but not limited to mortgages. He was delinquent on his mortgage, by the way. That was another bonus we discovered. Home equity loans, home improvement loans, homeowners association fees, and taxes, except seller is not aware of any liens or other encumbrances against the property, except we're not privy to what that listing agreement was between he and his broker. I can bet you $1 million he didn't fill one out. But this is why you need to fill this out, because he had no business, and he knew it, of selling this home. None whatsoever. And had he filled this out and attested to it, it would have been a different story. His broker could have gotten involved and said, hey, let's pump the brakes. You can't sell this unless these liens are satisfied. Okay, property is not subject to the jurisdiction of any court. If he was party to a divorce, this applies. All right, information relating to the property seller provides to broker is true and correct to the best of seller's knowledge. That packs a punch. And it just goes on for some other items. And then it says seller's additional promises. Seller agrees to cooperate with broker to facilitate showing, marketing, sale of property, not rent or lease the property during the listing period, not negotiate with any prospective buyer who may contact the seller directly. I'm reading these because the sellers will do this, not realizing what they signed. Not enter into a listing agreement with another broker for sale, exchange, lease, or management of the property. And then it goes on to say about pool and spa. So all that to say that if you are the owner and the agent of your own property, I need you to fill this out and in writing attest to really paragraph 12. Okay. And if this were your client, they have to take special note of that. It's gonna reveal itself in the title search anyway. And this gentleman was supposed to, we could have closed if he had brought $30,000 to the closing table, but he didn't have $30 to bring to the closing table. So it will end badly. So that is kind of the check and balance system for you as an agent if it's your property, just to make sure that that is all kind of buttoned down. All right, any questions on that?
Did you refer to this guy to Nicole Espinosa? Seriously.
I did not. That's a very good suggestion. Short sale queen. All right, so So that was it for today. Hopefully you picked up some tips. Anybody have anything else? Any questions, comments, other suggestions?
You know, the one thing, Brad, is you were talking about being very specific on the repair amendment. Yeah, and specifically HVAC systems. I mean, it's okay to specify, you know, SEER 16 efficiency unit, R 410A coolant, you know, because there's some people that may try to replace like an old, you know, old unit with an old unit, you know, because they give you a new one. Same thing with like roof, you know, just be really specific. You want architectural shingle roof, you know, strip down to the decking and replace all rotted decking, you know, just the more from a contractor's perspective, the more exact you can be on your request, the more likely you are to get what you're looking for.
Yeah, that's a great point about the roof, especially. I didn't think about the actual wood part of the roof itself. Yeah. All right, good. Anything else? All right. Well, thank you guys for hopping on, and we will, this will be posted on our website, sent out in an email in case you wanted to refer back to it, but we'll plan to meet back here next Thursday, 1 o'clock. You guys have a great rest of the week. Take care.
Thank you.